Hola, welcome back to another episode of Karishma Connect. How have you been? Well, I hope you've been well. And here I am back with another episode. Now, we've been talking a lot about entrepreneurs, setting up businesses, bringing it to the fore, kind of driving impact and all of that. But we haven't spoken about buying and selling businesses. Here I am diversifying the bunch of podcasts we've had with Richard Parker, an experienced mergers and acquisitions expert with over 30 years of experience in the field, speaking to me about business buying and business selling. What's in it for entrepreneurs? How can they be better prepared? What are some of the considerations they should be keeping in mind, and a whole lot more? So go check out the episode. Here's somebody who's spoken with the Forbes and New York Times and has brilliantly shared his insights on Karishma Connect, and I'm so honored to be able to host him. Until the next one, stay tuned. This is Karishma, and I'll be back yet again, yet another amazing story to tell. Until then, Tata. Thank you so much, Richard, for joining me on this episode of Karishma Connect. It's a pleasure to have you. Can't wait to know more about what you do, how you do it. And I really look forward because when I went through the profile, I had so many questions out there, which I'm really, really looking forward to, sharing with you and getting your insights on. But firstly, thank you.
Great. Oh, my pleasure. Thank you for having me, and fire away. I'm happy to answer as many questions as you have, and I look forward to sharing some stories with your listeners.
That's lovely. Now, the first one I have on Karishma Connect every episode is tell me about your journey so far. I know it's a huge one to talk about, it's a very long one, but I would say nobody says it better than you do. So I will leave it to you to let me know how you have arrived at the point you are and what makes it so special to be where you are today.
Okay, sure. Well, it's a long journey because I'm old, and there's certain parts of it that I find, that are pretty interesting as I reflect back, and it's hard for me to believe that 34 plus years have gone by since I've been in the world of buying and selling businesses, which is really crazy to me. I still feel like I was 18 years old about about an hour and a half ago, so that's wild. But I got into buying and selling businesses when I was in Canada. I grew up in Montreal, in a suburb of Montreal, Canada, a very lower middle class family, hardworking parents, surrounded by families that were all hardworking. Um, uh, Not some blue collar, some white collar, but all generally hardworking people. And I've always worked and always felt that I had a little bit of entrepreneurial spirit in my blood. And then I was working for a company when I was 29 years old. I got into a severe financial mess, totally my doing, sheer stupidity, and recognized that the only way that I would be able to get out of this hole was to get into a situation where I didn't have any limit on my upside, and that was the catalyst for me to going into my own business, because I recognized that the only way to remove the ceiling, if you will, from your earnings is for you to control what happens with your earnings. I mean, if you're
Yeah.
working for a company, no matter how well you do, you eventually reach a ceiling, and I didn't want that. So I went into my own business, and very small. And then shortly thereafterwards acquired a very complementary business. So I look at it that my starting out and the world of buying started almost simultaneously, and recognized pretty quickly that the best way to grow my business was going to be through acquisition. Organic growth is always interesting, but it's tough. And when I started recognizing that sometimes it's better off the cost of growing organically, when you do it in a good way, generally is not less expensive than growing through acquisition. And so I recognized that, and started buying up a number of companies. I was in the consumer products business and started buying up ancillary companies, and in distribution and importing and manufacturing. Then I bought a Far East trading company out of Hong Kong, because I was purchasing a lot of inventory out of the Far East, and complementary businesses. And I then had an offer to exit one of my companies, which was pretty attractive, and decided to do so. And that was shortly thereafter. This was all within 6 years. And I ended up relocating to South Florida in 1996 with my then wife and 3 children. And I've since been remarried for 23 years. And I was involved in looking at an acquisition down here after I relocated. And it was really a mess. And I remember thinking, after I told the owner that I was not going to go through with the deal, and I was standing outside their offices, I remember thinking to myself that, the average person who didn't have a ton of experience buying businesses would have gone through with that transaction. And it's only because I had done it so many times before, looked at it so many businesses, that I was able to separate and really identify what the problems were and know that this is too problematic. Like I've always said that the whole business started to look like a plate of spaghetti. I just couldn't figure anything out. And so I, at that point, became very intrigued with this idea of what people do who want to buy a business. And I spent the next year researching the whole market of buying and selling businesses, speaking to hundreds of business owners, similarly hundreds of people who bought businesses, other people who tried to buy a business and failed. Then I spoke to business brokers, accountants, attorneys, everybody involved in the field, and started recognizing a couple of things: that there was really no good resources for individuals who had no relative experience to acquire a business, but had hopes and dreams to get into their own business, and they couldn't do that. They couldn't find the adequate resources or reasonably priced, unbiased advice. And that became my obsession with putting together the years of looking at businesses. And I'd looked at, probably 100 of them at that point, bought several, and always kept great notes, and said, I'm going to put together a course to help people buy businesses, to take them along in a step-by-step fashion, to teach them what they need to know, what to do and how to do it, and also provide them with some hand-holding, so that, because one of the biggest problems that people have when they embark on a new project is, it's great if you get all this information, but who do you turn to if you need advice? And so finding believable parties that are really going to be helpful, that are going to give you advice in your best interest. If you have an intermediary in the deal, they generally represent the seller. Well, they're not going to give you, their goal is to get the deal to the finish line, and their deal is not to become your advisor. And accountants and attorneys have their role, but they're not necessarily the right parties as far as, the details that you have to get into when you're looking at evaluating a business. And so I really wanted to do this in a hand-holding way, and that's how my course, How to Buy a Good Business at a Great Price, was born. And my goal only was to help someone buy a good business. I just wanted to memorialize everything. I never thought it would turn into a business. I never went out to aggressively promote it. I just wrote a lot of content and put a lot of content online, write helpful articles. And again, I had no idea that this would ever turn into a business. And here we are, 20 years later, and it keeps getting updated. And we sold over 100,000 copies of this and helped tens of thousands of people. And parallel to all this, I kept doing my, by buying and selling. I've since bought, I've bought 14 companies, including a co-investment. I've been on the investment side, I've been represented buyers, sellers. So it's, in 34 years, if you love the space, you could do a lot of different things. That's what's really cool about buying and selling businesses. So I've come at it from all angles. So there is my long, boring journey to this point in time.
Not at all. In fact, what I'm very interested by is the fact that you started doing this at a time when, at least from my immediate knowledge, and I might be not well aware of it, but this is from the market that I have seen so far, business buying or acquisition wasn't as much of a hot topic, if I'm not wrong. Today it is. There are so many people who are aspiring at a very young age, willing to take that leap. I've had so many founders talk about acquisition on my platform as well. People are looking at it from an early stage, are kind of, they have background behind the word. For a long time, in my immediate knowledge, traditional business was about owning your own. I mean, owning
Right.
your setup. It wasn't about getting acquired or looking at a
Right.
valuation. How do you think the market has evolved? And second to that, what do you think is that one kind of core lesson or core hack that has kind of stood the test of time regardless?
Okay, so, and your observation is correct. The market has certainly evolved, and it's something that's become more attainable for the average person. Because I think a number of years ago, if I understand you correctly, is your perception was accurate, meaning people thought this is only for rich people or big business. They're
Yeah.
in the world of M&A. And I often tell people, like, don't confuse the word when they say M&A. This is just buying and selling businesses. So don't even word the jargon. The jargon itself is misleading. Mergers and acquisitions, right? If you're someone with, a few dollars wants to buy a business, that itself seems daunting. So it's the buying and selling in businesses. And it has evolved because as information has become more readily available for people, success stories and stories of failures become more prominent with, as the internet and social media and the word gets out. And also, the flip side of that, the negative side, is people end up getting caught up in a lot of these scams as far as get rich quick, or buying businesses for no money down, or these delusional programs, which I'm so opposed to. But yes, correct. The market has evolved, and it has become more readily available to a wider spectrum. And I think also it's become more interesting to younger people who look at it and say, look at their parents or their grandparents and say, like, there's no way I want to work for the same company for 40 years. And like, that's just boring. Like, I want to give myself an opportunity. And with the advent of technology, where you can get into business and apply technology to your business at a more reasonable price, are all things you couldn't do in the last generation. So I think the combination of all of that makes it more readily available for younger people and a larger market on the whole to get into their own businesses. So that's the reasoning behind the evolution, and your assumption or your observation is certainly correct. To the second point of why do people do this, or why, what is the catalyst for them to do this, or the common thing is, this is, people who want the opportunity to control their career. They want
Mm,
the opportunity to have an opportunity. They want to get
mm,
into a situation similar. When I got into it, my decision was strictly financial, which was, I was in a terrible financial situation. I had to figure out how to increase my earnings to get back the money that I had blown in a stupid way in the stock market. But there's a much bigger picture to it. So the first part is, sure, financial, that you want an opportunity to not have a ceiling on your earnings, and you can control your own career and control your own destiny to a certain extent, but really control your own career and what happens to you. There's also, you want it's for people who have they want to bet on themselves.
mm. Yeah.
And so, of course, you have other things that enter the equation, but people that feel, not all of them have the confidence at the early stages, but they recognize that betting on themselves is the best way to potentially get ahead. And so they look at this and say, this is the way I'm going to be able to do that, is through getting into my own business, whatever that looks like. Some people started a smaller way, side hustle. Some people look at franchises. I'm the buy an existing business guy. I believe in that. I've done the other ones. I haven't bought a franchise, but I have a good understanding of them. So that whole universe. But I think it's people who want to control their career. They want an opportunity. They want to have the chance to apply their skills and benefit from that. And then there's the drop down to all of that they learn as they go on, which is they have the opportunity to improve the lives of others. They have the
Mm,
opportunity to make an impact, to empower other peoples, to do something that they really find enjoyable. And, so for all of those reasons, this becomes very attractive to people. But certainly, if you're to draw a Venn diagram with all these things, the one thing in the hub would be people who want to control their career.
yeah. And then what would you say from the other end of things, when people are looking to make that decision about selling their business? What kind of perspective do you think they need to keep in mind? Because I know of several founders who are faced by that dilemma of whether they should take that offer, or they should proceed. What do you think is the perspective they need to look at?
There's a few. Number one, they need to be realistic
Mm,
with what is this going to look like as far as an exit is concerned, from a dollar standpoint, to really
yeah.
be realistic. Because very often, and I've represented many sellers over the years, I still do, and oftentimes what they believe, what an individual thinks their business is worth, rarely has anything to do with the value. So the first thing is, start to breathe oxygen from this planet and get in touch with, what's realistic, what price, terms, etc., what the market will look like. That's
Yeah.
one important piece. The second thing is, really, it's very important to think about, if you're going to go down the road of selling your business, what are you going to do afterwards?
Mm,
Like, are you going to be okay with it? Because sellers get remorse as often as buyers do. Oftentimes, people have devoted their career, that's their life, that's their legacy, that's their blood, sweat, and tears are invested in that business. And you have to give a lot of thought to what happens the day after. Yes, there'll be a transitional period. Sometimes there's deals where you remain on, but by and large, what is your life going to look like? And are you okay with what's going to happen, that you don't have a place to go anymore?
Mm.
Now you may have, so thinking about alternate plans and what that looks like, that's really important as well. So the expectations, then thinking about what life is going to look like. And the third piece, which is really, really important, is if you decide to sell your business and you're going to put it on the market, is you have to run your business like it's not going to sell. People
Elaborate.
people take their eye off the ball. They think they're going to sell, they're going to have all this money or whatever that may look like, and they stop doing the things in their business that got them to that point in the first place. And then a year goes by, it hasn't sold, and now it's like, oh shoot, like I've lost a year here, and I haven't done the right things, or I cut some expenses to try to make the business look good, all these type of things. You cannot do that. You have to make the assumption the business is not going to sell. And of course, I'm a strong believer in engaging the right intermediary to help you sell the business, specifically for the last point, so that you can keep running your business without interference.
Yeah.
And that's a whole separate conversation. But those are really the most important things, the way people have to look at the exit piece.
But I want to touch on to that point that you just mentioned. How can people assess the best partner for them in that journey?
As far as you're talking about an intermediary,
Yeah.
there's a number of ways. First thing is, obviously, if you get a referral from someone who has already sold their business, or an attorney or an accountant that worked with this individual and has had a good experience, well, that's certainly helpful. When you go through the process of selling your business, there's lots of highs and lows, and you
Mm.
want to make sure that you feel very, very comfortable with that individual, that there's a really high level of trust. When I
Mm.
take on an engagement, I think the criteria that I use for a client is the exact same criteria that a client should use for me or an intermediary. To me, I have to like them, and I have to trust them,
Mm.
because you're going to have some ups and downs. And I would suggest to people, interview a lot of intermediaries. And just because someone is new at it doesn't mean
Mm.
that they're not capable, because sometimes they may hustle more than the next person. And
Yeah.
so the experience is important, but it's not at the top of the list. Trust and liking them is. The next piece is, how are they going to market the business? In the lower
Mm.
end, what has happened, the internet has been the greatest blessing and the worst curse at the same time for businesses for sale, because suddenly people find businesses all over the internet that are available for sale, whereas it used to be, in the business opportunity section in the Sunday paper, a
Yes.
generation ago. Now they're everywhere. But the flip side to that, and the curse part, is that intermediaries very often take this shortcut. They just take the listing, they don't write it up properly, they don't understand the business, and they just throw it up online as an
Mm.
advertisement, hoping, it's like spray and pray, hoping it'll sell. So there's
Mm.
that piece, understanding how they'll market the business. And the last piece, which I think is as important to the like and trust, which is, how are they going to learn your business? If
Mm.
they're just coming in with an idea of getting a listing like a real estate agent, throwing it online and hoping it's good, they're going to find a buyer, versus, do they grill you and drill you with questions about the business? Like, do they really want to have this deep, deep understanding of the business? Like, my agenda when I take on a seller engagement is, I want to know that business more than anybody else on the planet except the owner, so that I can answer 90% of the inquiries, and also have a really good understanding, also to know whether or not I believe it's going to sell. So understanding that's why you want to have a lot of meetings with the intermediary, because you want to see, are they just pushing to get the engagement, or are they really trying to get to the guts of the business, to understand it, to understand you, understand your motivations, and set a realistic price.
Do you think, as an intermediary, it is very important to have that belief as well? Do you believe? What would you say if I said that if belief is not there in a particular business, it is very difficult to buy it, it is very difficult to pitch it for business buying,
I
or
think
would you say it's possible?
I think any intermediary who takes on an engagement that doesn't fully believe the business is going to sell should be ashamed of themselves. That's what I believe. When I
Yes.
look at a business, I when I look at a business and saying, when I speak to a prospective seller, from my own belief is, if this was a type of business that was of interest to me, would I buy this business? If my answer is no, I would never take on an engagement. I also look at it and say, would I recommend to one of my family members to buy this business? And if the
Yeah.
answer is no, I wouldn't take it on. And I think if more intermediaries had that approach, they would have a much better success rate. Understand that in the lower market, 75% of the businesses that are brought to market don't sell. And that reason being is this old philosophy of there's a buyer for every business. No, there's not a buyer for every business. There's a buyer for every four businesses, right? And so if you don't have a deep belief, so I have a number of criteria. The one, would I buy this myself? Would I recommend it to someone? And do I believe fundamentally that based on the criteria of having good books and records, that it can transition well to a lot of buyers, that things are in order, that's a good solid business that someone could build? I have to have a 90% probability rate in my mind, based on my experience, that the business is going to sell. And I have my own data points for that, which a lot of them are common. But yes, I mean, if an intermediary doesn't have full faith in it, I fundamentally believe they should be ashamed of themselves.
What makes the current market scenario worth it for business buyers and sellers?
Well, let's talk about the buy side, because right now I believe we're in a buyer's market for decades, decades and decades. It's always been a seller's market because of one thing and one thing only. There's always a shortage of good businesses. And so, and you always have a ton of people looking to buy. And so when you take it's supply and demand. If you have a shortage, if you have a shortage of good businesses available and lots of people looking for them, prices go up. Sellers can more often dictate their terms. And so it's always been a seller's market if one wants to draw the parallel between business sales and real estate sales, just to put some terminology or layer some terminology onto it. Over the
Yeah.
last few years, it's really shifted to become a buyer's market for a number of reasons. Interest rates have gone way up. And so that reduces the leverage that people can put onto a business, the number of banks that will be willing to lend money, the amount that they're willing to lend for a transaction. A lot of people have, inflation has increased. People's earning power has gone down dramatically. And so, and with that, confidence declines, and there's always this hovering idea that there may be a recession. I'm still waiting. I don't even know. I understand what the textbook definition is, and they keep telling we're not. But I look at it and say, I know when my wife goes to the grocery store and spends the same amount of money and buys less stuff, or spends more, has to spend more to get the same thing. To me, that's recession, right? So I'm not a Harvard economist, but to me, it's pretty simple. And so when you have that, so when you have inflation. So people's confidence goes down, and when they say confidence, how confident they aren't thinking, well, I can buy something and business is going to become good, and interest rates dropping, and also multiples have declined in business sales because that's as a result they got inadequately or wrongly inflated in the last couple of years. So all those things, what happens is that those things lead to one thing only, which is less people are looking. And
Yeah.
so when you reduce the buyer pool, it then starts to shift to a buyer's market as well. Over the last few years, we've had these things, a pandemic, and then some threats of
Yeah.
recession, and then interest rates going up, all these things. And what happens is people looking to acquire a business say, hey, Mr. or Mrs. Business owner, that's great that you want X or Y amount for your business, but I can't even predict the future, because normally you take the past historical financials to give you an indication of the future. But you've been all over the place. It's like a roller coaster. And so
Yeah.
for me to buy this business, I need some assurances that the business is going to remain status quo. Like, it's great. Growth is sexy, but stability is really valuable. And so for me to have that insurance, I need some protections in the deal. And those very often lend themselves to having performance-based deals or earnout. Here's the value of the business, but as long as this happens. And so if this happens or that happens, I'll pay you this amount. But if it doesn't happen, we need to adjust. And so all those things lend themselves. It's a beautiful thing. I call it a beautiful upheaval in the market, because it's really puts all the favor in the hands of the buyer, who typically absorbs most of the risk in these deals. And the last part, and sorry to be long-winded, is because of these issues related to financing and traditional banks lending less money, seller financing is becoming infinitely more prevalent. It's been something that's been done in North America for years, but I see it now really happening in the UK and other countries as well, where seller financing is required to bridge the deal. I would never do a deal without seller financing, even if I had other financing. Well, I want the seller to have skin in the game. 91% of our clients who follow our program get seller financing for part or all of the deal, not 100%, but as the component of financing. And so that having that as well in the game gives people with less equity or money to put into a deal another option to finance the purchase. So there's a lot of these pieces at play, which are really positive for a buyer.
Also, the industries have diversified, right? Because it's no longer your traditional setup. Like I said, with technology and innovation and all of that, there's so much more scope and so many different avenues that have
Yes.
come up that must have added. Tell me some of the common mistakes you think people make that they could avoid potentially.
As buyers,
Yeah.
well, the single biggest thing that buyers do wrong is they jump into this with no knowledge, no expertise, no track record, no understanding, and think that this is similar to buying real estate, which they're not even close. It's like saying to someone, "This is the real estate and business buying. This have the same thing in common as buying shoes and an office furniture." I mean, there's nothing in common except that
Please
you're gonna
elaborate that.
like they're completely unique and separate. Completely unique and separate. The process is different, and the mentality of even drawing a connection between the two is terrible, because what happens if you buy the wrong piece of real estate and you hold on to it, as long as time heals every real estate error, and the building will still be standing. Whereas
Yeah.
as long as you can service the debt, you buy the wrong business for you, you're going bankrupt, guaranteed, and it's certainly going to south in a hurry. So this lack of knowledge going into this without it is really, really a terrible mistake that buyers make. And so the first thing they should do is take a step back and figure, how am I going to get educated by the right people and get the right information? It's not just searching online for information, because there's a lot of bad information like everything else. The next thing is getting really aligned with what is the right business for you, because the right business for me is not the right business for you, and the right business for you is not the right business for the next person. So you want to match your skill set, your greatest
Mm,
skill set, to a
mm,
business that needs that to drive the revenue and profits of the business. And so
yeah.
the line that I've been using for years is, whatever it is that you do best has to be the single most important driving factor of the revenue and profits of any business you consider purchasing. So that's really, really important, the alignment of your skill set. And the third thing is to understand there's no such thing as a perfect business.
Yeah.
Every business, the only business that's perfect is the one that is not in business yet. That's why people, right? I mean, other than that, because there's nothing wrong and there's nothing right about it. Other than that, every business has blemishes. Every business has warts. It's making sure that you could solve for them. If the blemishes or warts are too large and you can't solve for them, then you don't buy it, similar to that first example I gave you. But understand there's nothing perfect. There's issues that are going to come up. You have to make sure they're not catastrophic, being able to separate incidents from catastrophes. But if you can't get your head around the fact that you're not going to buy a perfect business, and understand that you have to deal with these bumps in the roads and imperfections along the way, if you can't handle that concept, then entrepreneurship is not for you. Because when
Mm,
you own a business, it's not all pixie dust and unicorns. There's always issues. And
yes.
so being able to understand that and getting your head around that is critically important. So those are the big three. The knowledge, the right, make sure the right business, and understanding there's no such thing as a perfect business.
You actually led on to the question I was just about to ask you, which is, what is that one thing you've learned about risk over the years? I know you've hinted at this in the third point, but please elaborate.
I think you have to understand that risk, you want to mitigate risk as best you can, but there's always going to be risk. Reality in business, there's always going to be risk, even in the buying of business. You can mitigate or solve for almost all of it if you do it in a good way. Um, Understanding how to do that, whether it be on concern about issues related to the business, customer concentration, or key employees, or leases, or the industry itself, you can solve for all. If you can solve for them, for the big ones, then the business is probably not the right one to buy. However, risk is going to be inherent. You can solve or reduce your risk with having the right knowledge to be able to do that, but you're not going to eliminate it. You can eliminate the guesswork by being educated. You can't eliminate all the risk. And
Yeah.
again, it's similar to the perfect business syndrome, where if you can't live with some risk, get a job.
Yeah.
And I don't mean to be demeaning. I mean, it's not for everybody. I mean, and certain things like embracing risk and embracing failure and embracing being wrong and all these type of things that lead to good learning. You have to learn how to address it,
Yeah.
understand what it really is, and
Yeah.
can I solve for that? And if you can't solve for it, and you can't live with it, then you
Mm.
don't proceed. That's all.
Mm. Very true. Very true. And I think that's what probably you would say aspiring buyers or aspiring people who would like to be in this industry need to keep in mind as well, right?
Correct.
From okay, from a younger perspective. If you were to explain the process to say a 5 year old, and I know I haven't heard of any 5 year old so far, although I don't think that's going to be a reality very soon. I think 5 year olds have more knowledge now. If you were to break down the process, basically as simple as that, how would you say? How would you put out the entire process of business buying?
That's a great question, by the way.
Thank
Great.
you.
And I've done a lot of these podcasts. I'm asked to do them all the time. That's a great question. So,
Thank
how
you.
I would explain it to a 5-year-old, obviously the details related to valuation and depreciation, things like that, they could never get their head around. Of course
Yeah,
not. But the
yeah,
way I would explain this to them is I would say, if you're going to buy a business, it's going to be similar to if you've gone to the beach and you want to build a sandcastle. When you go to
okay,
build a sandcastle, you don't start with the tower on top because it's going to fall down. There's nothing to hold on to it. So first thing you do is you clear the sand and you make
yeah,
the sand smooth, right? And they would say, yeah, and right. And then you go take a couple of pails and you run to the ocean and you fill them up with water. And that's going to be the next step of things of being properly prepared.
yeah,
And so then you say, well, I don't really know how to do this, a sandcastle, because I've never built one before. So I'm going to ask my mom or dad or grandparents. And that is similar to buying a business where you're going to ask people who've done this before how you should do this. And then you're going to ask them to sit right with you in the sand and help you build the sandcastle. And you're slowly going to move sand around and you're going to build the first level. And then
very
you're going
good.
to build a second one and you say, oh no, you know what? I didn't build the first level wide enough. So the second level collapsed. So we got to start again. And that's similar to, I started spending all this time looking at one particular business and then I found the problem and I couldn't buy it. So now I got to start again. And that's the
Mm.
way I would explain it, that it would go stage by stage until you get to the top of the castle and it's standing. And so that's how I would explain it to a 5-year-old is be prepared, get the table set, bring in the right people, understand there's things that go wrong. You have to, you'll fix them and you start again. And then you just slowly but surely, you're eventually going to get to the finish line.
That's wonderful, and I'm sure they would understand it
I
perfectly.
hope so, right?
That's much easier to me. Tell me, how can for those who don't know how to access, how can they access services offered by yourself and gain a better understanding of the entire process?
Go to richardparker.com. We have hundreds of free articles, free reports, all kinds of great information. Our courses are available there too as well. But certainly, if someone wants to just dip their toe in the water and learn a little bit more, I mean, you've had some great questions. We covered a bunch of things, but certainly all components related to the process. We have a whole series of exactly he asked about the 5-year-old. We lay out the processes, the stages in the process, and say here's 25 articles related to choosing a business or valuing business, etc. So there's tons of free information, and it's all available on richardparker.com.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Richard, for joining me on this episode. It's been a pleasure, and I've got to learn a lot from it, and I'm sure the listeners will as well. Thank you. It's been an honor, really, to be doing this with you. Thank you.
Thank you, Karishma. I really appreciate you having me, and I know it's late at night for you, so especially so. And thank you again. You had some great questions. I really appreciate it.